A broad majority of Americans say they support stricter gun laws. Take a look at this new CNN poll. It finds that 70% of people want tougher restrictions on firearms. Back in October, after the Las Vegas concert massacre, the number was just 52% in favor. Congress is back in session tomorrow. Will they begin the process to pass some legislation? With me to discuss this, CNN political commentators Jason Miller and Maria Cardona. Maria, a Democratic strategist. Jason, of course, a former senior advisor to the Donald Trump campaign. Jason, let's start with you. I mean, look at those numbers. 7 in 10 Americans say they want stricter gun laws. Can Republicans afford to do nothing?
Well, Ryan, I think that's why you're seeing President Trump providing the leadership that he is, immediately going after increased background checks and even having some very tough words at the CPAC conservative conference this past weekend. I mean, what we saw in Florida with the tragedy was an absolute failure at all levels. I mean, we saw someone who clearly is very mentally disturbed, who the school district missed it. There were police reports that were filed. The FBI missed it. I mean, I watched Jake Tapper's interview with Sheriff Israel earlier today and was absolutely horrified how this sheriff could think that he was providing amazing, and that was the word he used, leadership during this time. And I think it's just been an absolute failure. But look, President Trump is providing strong leadership here, everything from ordering the ATF to go and take action on bump stocks. And I think really what people want to see is to make sure that we don't allow guns to get in the hands of people who are either A, mentally insane, or B, criminals.
All right, Maria, 7 out of 10, that sounds like a big number, but that's a pretty broad question. They want stricter gun control laws. Is there a problem here that Democrats have not been able to hone their message and specifically put a substantive piece of legislation behind this idea of stricter gun control?
No, I don't think it's been a problem of Democrats at all when you have had many bills in the past that focus on universal background checks, which, by the way, 97% of Americans support. It's not a problem of Democrats. It's a problem of politicians bought and paid for by the NRA. And with all due respect to my friend Jason, talk is cheap. The time for action is now. And though what President Trump is talking about sounds good, we'll see if he will have the spine to stand up to the NRA, who put $30 million of campaign money into his presidential campaign. And more so than that, it's going to take the politicians in the Senate and in the House of Representatives who have been bought and paid for by the NRA to actually pass the legislation that the NRA is against. So we'll see what happens moving forward. What I think, though, is that these kids have completely injected a new day, hopefully, and hopefully they have injected steel into the spine of those who have yet been too cowardly to do anything at this point.
All right, Jason, earlier today, President Trump's re-election campaign emailed this photo showing President Trump with a shooting survivor. This is from the Parkland massacre. The email then went on to ask for a donation to his campaign. I mean, you were a part of this campaign at one point, Jason. Is this appropriate for the president to fundraise off a tragedy like this?
Well, clearly on an email like this probably is not something that the president himself would have seen. I do think it would be appropriate to send out a picture from the official side of things, from the White House, talking about the president visiting with both victims and first responders. I think that would be appropriate. I would not have used that picture in a campaign email. And I think going back to the more important point here is the actual leadership that we've seen from the president. I mean, how remarkable is it that this president went in front of CPAC, a conservative conference, and talked about things that we have to do to make sure that tragedies like this never happen again.
Jason,
that's the kind of leadership that we're seeing from the president right now.
Jason, let me make 2 points on this. First of all, I mean, the president may have not had express knowledge of this particular photo going out, but it is under his name, so he does bear a degree of responsibility. And when you talk about what was said at CPAC, there was a lot the president left out of that speech at CPAC, particularly the idea that he supports the idea of raising the age limit to 21. Does he need to be leading on this at all fronts, not just when he's in front of a friendly audience?
But Ryan, the fact that the president did go and bring this up and did address it at CPAC, I think you have to give him some credit. I think that's one of the things that sometimes my friends on the political left forget to do, is to actually acknowledge this is very much like a Nixon goes to China type moment where we're seeing President Trump step step forward. And again, going back to the email, I said that is not something that I would have signed off or I would have been on board with at all. But also, let's call balls and strikes here. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of leftist center Democrats who are out there sending out fundraising emails as well. And so let's go and call it both ways.
Well, I'm sure this isn't the first time it's happened on either side of the aisle. You're absolutely right about that, Jason. Maria.
On the speech, Ryan, just a couple of things here. This is not a Nixon goes to China moment. President Trump did not go up in front of CPAC to say, work with me on passing sensible, popular gun safety legislation. He absolutely did not talk about anything that he wanted to pass in front of that crowd. And in fact, he applauded the NRA over and over and over again. So I'm sorry, it was a completely cowardly speech. And secondly, when he talks about not wanting the mentally ill to get a hold of guns, then why in February of last year did he block an Obama-era regulation that would have done exactly that and kept 75,000 mentally ill people in the United States from acquiring guns? Again,
Maria, fact checkers have said that that's not the case. That's a false interpretation of that.
Is the case. No, it absolutely is the case.
Let's move on to a different.
That's not the case, Maria.
He blocked the rule.
But
That's
Maria,
a
I want to make
fact.
a point. I want to make a point about the point you made about the NRA, and there's been a lot of talk about the NRA's influence and the millions of dollars that they've sent to Republican candidates. But Maria, have we lost sight a little bit about that the NRA is more than just a fundraising mechanism here? They do have millions of members who are politically active and get involved in campaigns, knocking on doors, making phone calls, sending emails. To a certain extent, they are a grassroots organization, aren't they? And should these politicians just ignore their point of view because of what has happened here over the past few weeks?
Well, what's interesting about that, Ryan, is that actually the majority of NRA members also agree that we should have universal background checks, but yet the NRA as an organization does not want to pass any kind of legislation that would keep any kind of weapon out of any kind of Americans' hands, regardless of whether they should have it or not. And I think that is the bottom line. They don't want to do anything. And you just have to listen to Wayne LaPierre's speech, which he says that anybody that is looking for any kind of legislation, additional gun legislation, wants to take away your freedom. That is not
Maria,
that is not the language of an organization that wants to do something sensible on gun safety.
All right, Jason, you can have the last word here because we have to go.
I think you're going to see the NRA come together with President Trump to come up with some solid, thoughtful solutions here. I think it's most important, these background checks and making sure that mentally insane people and criminals do not get their hands on guns, and also to make sure that whether it be DCF, the local sheriff's office, the FBI, do not allow these red flags to go unnoticed. That's really where the problems are. And the final thing I'll say is we also have to make sure that the folks on the left, whether it be the editorial pages of the Boston Globe or whether it be the Oregon, democratically controlled Oregon State House, that they don't start pushing forward for outright gun confiscation. That's not the way to go. We need to make sure that people who are either crazy or criminal, make sure they do not get their hands on guns.
When you eject that kind of language, that means you really don't want any solutions.
We will find out what's going to happen when Congress returns to work on Monday to see if anything substantive will be taken up on this particular issue. Jason Miller, Maria Cardona, thank you as always for the very lively discussion.